Hey everyone, this lesson is on exponents with fractions and simplifying radicals. This lesson can be a little bit challenging because it expects you to have worked with exponents in the past. So what we're going to be looking at first is taking an exponent that has a fraction in it and rewriting it as a radical expression. So what I'm talking about is if you have something like 2 to the 1/2 power. We want you to be able to rewrite that using radical notation. So what this top one is saying is if I have the number, the base, to some exponent, what I'm going to do is write my root or my radical, and the number that was outside now goes in the inside. And then my number on the bottom, that becomes the index of my root. So what 2 to the 1/2 is actually saying is it actually wants the square root of 2. So when you start getting into bigger numbers, like 16 to the 1/2, if I write that, I draw my radical, I put my 16, my index is 2, and now I can actually simplify that. 16 to the 1/2 is the same thing as the square root of 16, or 4. So anytime I see a 1/2, now I know they really just want what's the square root, and then you can find your perfect square. Now this rule only works if the numerator is 1. If we have a different one, let's go back to the 2, and now let's say I have 2 to the 3/2. When I go to write it, the rule's still the same. Whatever number is the base here goes inside there. And then the number on the bottom, the 2, still goes there. But now it's saying that this number on top of the fraction becomes an exponent. So that's saying 3. So what this is actually saying is they want you to find the square root of 2 to the 3rd power. If I did that on this one, 16 to the 3/2, that's saying the square root of 16, and then you're going to take that answer and cube it, or multiply it by 3. So that's the first thing you need to be able to do. So let's look at some practice problems. If I have 3 to the 1/2, I draw my radical. My 3 goes in the inside. My exponent is 1, so I don't need to write it. And then that's a 2. Our next one is 11 to the 1/5, so I draw my radical, put in my 11, my index is 5, and my exponent is 1. Even if it's a fraction to begin with, that's okay. We can still write it the same way. We're going to draw my radical. I'm going to put my 1/4 under, and then my index is 5. And we'll do it one more time. My base is 6, my index is 10. Looking at just these, let's just do one of them. Now if I have 4 to the 5/2, we make my radical, put my 4, put my 2, and now I have an exponent, so this whole thing gets raised to the 5th. Now what's different in this problem is now they want you to actually simplify it. So if I'm going to do that, I'm going to start in here and find my square root of 4, which is 2. Then I'm left with my exponent of 5, and 2 to the 5th power is the same as 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 2 is 16. And 16 times that last 2 is 32. So my answer to this problem is 32. So let's go back and solve. We already did 2 to the 3 over 2 earlier. That was 2 to the third. So now if I look at it, I can't do the square root of 2 because it's not a perfect square. So what we can do is we can change the order. And I'm going to do 2 to the third power first. So if I do that, 2 times 2 times 2, that we already did there, that gives us 8. Now I have the square root of 8. In order to simplify this, because 8's not a perfect square, what we're going to do is we're going to go and do your old school factor trees from 6th grade. We're going to take 8 and break it down into its prime numbers. That gives me 2 times 4, because 2 times 4 is 8. And then I break 4 down into 2 and 2. So now I can see 8 is 2 times 2 times 2. And now it wants groups of 2 because it's saying squared. So I'm going to circle 2 2's there. And that means if I try and do the square root of this, I have enough to pull 1 2 out. But then one poor 2 got left behind and it's going to stay inside the radical. So our answer is 2 root 2. And now this is the part we're going to start practicing more, is simplifying your radical. And you're going to get into some really big numbers in this lesson. So we really want to make sure you remember how to do your factor trees from earlier in school. So first, we just want to practice simplifying. So what I have here is 3 problems. In this first one, we have the cube root of 8. Well, that's the one we just almost did, but that's the square root of 8. So this time, when we do the cube root, we just did this tree, so we don't really need to do it again. Now, this group of 3 is saying it doesn't take 2 2's to make 8. We want groups of 3. And we just so happen to have 3 2's right there. So that means my answer is there's one group of 2 and nothing left over. So the cube root of 8 is 2. If I go to 16, I'm going to break it down using my tree. I know that's 4 times 4, which is 2 and 2, another 2 and 2. So I'm going to write 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. I look at my index, it's telling me groups of 3. So again, I circle my 3 2's. So now I have one group of 2, but I have one sad 2 left behind. So that means my answer to the cube root of 16 is 2 cube root of 2. And the last one, getting a little bit bigger, the square root of 108. I know that 2 goes into that 54 times because 2 goes into 10 5 and 8 4. Then the first thing that jumps to mind is 6 and 9. 6 breaks up into 2 and 3, and 9 breaks up into 3 and 3. So now I'm going to write it out. Don't forget that first 2 up there like I almost did. And now there is no number here, so that means it's a 2. That's a square root. So now I'm going to look for anything that makes groups of 2. So I have 2 3's there. Sorry, 2 2's and 2 3's. Since I have one of each, that means on the outside of the root is 2 times 3, root, and then left on the inside is a 3. So when I simplify that, that gives us an answer of 6 root 3. Now getting a little bit harder. We have 1,250 to the 3/4 root. So first thing we're going to do is make our radical. Put that on the inside. And then it's to the 3rd power. So that's a 4th root. Now I'm going to try and break this down. I see a 0, so I'm going to do 10 and 125. That 10 gives me 2 and 5. That 125 is 5 and 25. And then that 25 is another 5 and 5. So if I list this out, that's 2 times 5 times 5 times 5 times 5. This is telling me we want groups of 4. So I have 5 root 2. But now we have to remember our answer was cubed. So what that means is both of these we need to do to the third power. So 5 to the third power is 125, and root 2 to the third power is 8. So that means our final answer would be 125 fourth root, don't forget our little index there, 8. So the whole number is 125, and the number under the radical is 8. So these problems you can tackle easy if you can just make your factor tree. Next one, I know my students probably would freak out right away seeing this because we already have a fraction to begin with. So what we're going to do is we're not going to freak out. We're just right away, we're going to see if we can find a cube root of 108. So we've already done this one back here. 108 we're going to copy was 2 2s and 3 5s. So 2 times 2 times 5 times 5 times 5. And we can check that. 5 times 5 is 25. Oops, did I write that wrong? Oh, 3 3s, not 5s. Now let's check. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. 27 times 2 is 54. Times another 2 is 108. Now it's telling us we want the cube root. So that means we have 3 3s there. So that gives us 1/4 times 3 cube root of 2 times 2. So I have 1/4 times 3 cube root of 4 to the x power. So that's going to give us, if I simplify, I can multiply the 3 and the 1/4. That gives us 3/4 times the cube root of 4 to the x. And that could be the answer. That is a simplified answer. But some of these problems want you to be able to go one step further and actually simplify this by writing this in exponential form. So if we go back to our rule, we'll just put our 3/4 there, let it hang out. If I go backwards, I know that when I do an exponent, whatever number is underneath was the original exponent. So that 4 we take out and goes up there. Then it's the exponent over the index. So now I have 3/4 times 4 to the x over 3, which is correct, but we can simplify it by doing 3/4 times 4, and that ends up giving you an answer of 3 to the x over 3. So honestly, any of these answers here are correct. It just depends on what form they want it in. Do they want it in a simplified radical? Do they want it in y equals a times b to the x form, like this one? Or do they want it completely simplified, meaning you have to multiply these two to get your final answer? So you really have to just pay attention to what the question is asking. And one more problem, kind of like the last one. We're going to see if we can simplify this. We have the 4th root of 9 to the 1/2 x power. If I have 9 there, that's 3 and 3. That doesn't give me a group of 4. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and write this in exponential form. So we're going to take the 9 out and make it big. and raise it to the power of 1/2 over 4x. I know we hate fractions, but we have to do it. We're going to do 1/2 divided by 4, which is 4 over 1. And remember, division is really multiplication. So that gives us 1/8. So this problem is actually 9 to the 1/8 x power. And that would be your answer until we know x. So even if it's a fraction, the rule's still the same, and then we just have to divide it. So that ends this video. I hope this helps you. Thanks for watching.